My name's James and I paint minis. This is Spoon 37 Minis.
So, if you watched the How to Paint Your First Mini video, particularly part 2, you'll remember this rather awkward section of painting the chest. Now, there must be an easier way than this, right? Well, actually there is, and it's what I call painting in sub-assemblies, but it means assembling the miniature quite differently, so we're going to have to start with a miniature that's in pieces. Now I'm going to show you several different methods, but the first and most obvious is that this plastic frame is already holding onto the pieces. So how do we make use of that to paint this arm with the bolt gun? So first we're going to free it from the other pieces, but then we're also going to cut a little bit of the sprue itself using slightly heavier cutters. And that way, that should leave us with the bolt gun arm held by the sprue, so you don't actually have to hold the arm, you can just hold the spare plastic frame or sprue. Now, as ever, I'm going to drill out the gun barrel using the oldie pin drill that I bought in the 1990s. You can buy a modern version of this, it just looks a little bit different. And so I drill it crossways, and then we drill the end of the barrel, which with hindsight I probably should have marked properly because I drill it ever so slightly off center in the end, but it's close enough. So that is this gun arm pretty much ready to go, just removing the excess flash from drilling using the mold line remover tool, and that is actually that piece ready to paint now. Right, now the reason that I call this sub-assemblies rather than just painting the model in pieces is that actually you can build up part of the model into a sub-assembly. So for example, I'm going to take this torso piece, and then we're going to take the back of the torso, so I've figured out which bits are holding onto it that shouldn't be, and then I'm going to assemble that and also stick it into the slot base as well, so that it's actually three pieces: the base, the main torso and legs, and the back of the torso, and then those just push together, and that will create one sub-assembly, if you will. Right, so we just slot that into the base, and that, if you like, is the biggest single piece we're going to paint as a sub-assembly. As I showed you with the How to Assemble Your First Mini video, it's quite important to go over the model with a mold line remover tool or a craft knife, just to remove any bits that might be sticking up from where it was cut away from the original sprue, and any mold lines that might be leaving a line on any areas that really shouldn't have a line sticking up. Right, so that's that sub-assembly complete, ready for paint. And now we move on to the head. Now I've actually slightly cut this free from its mounting, because normally there's a bit sticking out below that actually goes into the torso, so I've actually removed that for this purpose, which is a little unusual. It's kind of against what the instructions say, but for this purpose it actually makes a lot of sense, because we're going to have to mount this in a completely different way to it being permanently part of the torso. Now Now again, we're just removing the mold lines on the head, make it nice and smooth, because there is a line that goes across almost like a headband, which you don't want to be there. And now I'm going to show you another way that involves some sprue of mounting the heads separately. Now, a lot of my methods obviously stick this in poster putty or something bigger, but it really needs something like a plastic rod underneath, so I'm going to glue these bits together. Now, in addition to the sprue, I'm also going to use a cork and some of this poster putty, you know, the sort of stuff you work it until it's sticky, you stick it on top of just an ordinary cork, and then we can put that piece of sprue sticking vertically up and then glue the head to it. So we put that pointed surface down, and then we've got a nice flat surface for the head to glue onto. So now I'm going to use some super glue, and this is important. I'm not using plastic glue, which actually melts the two pieces together. I'm using super glue, which actually goes quite hard and brittle. The idea is that after you're done with painting, this will be easy to snap off the end of the sprue, and though it might leave a bit of glue residue, it won't be something that you actually have to cut free later on. Now, to make painting the body and torso and legs easier, we're going to use a Games Workshop painting handle to mount that on. Now, for the final method, I've cut these two pieces free. This is the backpack and remaining arm, and we're going to mount these onto perhaps the most involved method, little blocks of wood which have been drilled to accept a piece of wire. This is an extremely flexible method, but it does require things like pliers and a pin drill, and obviously the ability to cut out little blocks of wood. So it's a little bit more involved, but it does actually give you a lot of options. So for example, we can put this arm on a looped round bit of wire, which will need probably to be slightly squashed before it will accept that. And then for the backpack, I think we'll actually have to drill that out in order for it to go onto a piece of wire. Either method works. So I'm going to drill out the stalk that actually pushes into the back of the torso. That way it won't show up later on, but I should be able to put this on the wire with a little bit of super glue and snap it off later on. Again, it may leave some glue residue that needs removing, but otherwise it should then assemble exactly as intended. It's just the rest of the backpack will be painted by the time we get to that stage. Now, although it seems to take a while, the hole doesn't have to be particularly deep as long as it will fit on the wire without coming free, because obviously we're going to put a small spot of super glue on this, so that's perfectly acceptable. But as you see, it does spin round, which is why it will need glue. So again, with the no-name brand super glue, we just put a spot on there and stick the wire in, and then if we leave it for a few seconds it should dry, and then it should be ready to paint. And just to be on the safe side, we're also going to do the same with this arm. Though it may or may not be necessary. I'm just thinking, you know, I don't want it to fall off whilst I'm in the middle of painting this, particularly if I'm painting it on video, which would be quite embarrassing. And there we go, that's everything mounted up. Now, whilst I am billing this as an easier way of painting the model, because obviously you can get into all the difficult areas very easily, I'm actually going to show you a little bit of painting primer on this arm and then one of the problems that this causes, because if you see what I mean, whilst it's all very well for my fingers to go all the way around, you're then left with the problem of, okay, I've finished painting and I want to put this down. How do I put it down? one thing I would like you to also note is that when I'm painting this, I'm not actually painting inside the area that attaches to the rest of the model. I know that getting a little bit of paint in there might be inevitable, but I'm trying to avoid actually filling the hole that the peg needs to go into for later on. Now it is my intention to use black primer on the bolt gun, so I'm only going to show you finishing off the grey primer on the arm itself. You'll see why when I come to assemble the model just later in this video, because this is actually going to be quite a light colour Space Marine, rather than the usual kind of grim dark colours that are typical. Right, so now that's covered in wet paint, how do you put it down without ruining the paint job? You kind of can't really, can you? So what we do is, like with how we mounted the head, we get a cork and some poster putty and stick it in there, and that way it can dry without actually resting on any of the painted surfaces. Now later on, you have to assemble a model after it's been painted. So what does that look like? So I have done some hours of painting, and here we have every single piece ready to go. So what do we actually do? Well, we start with the biggest piece that everything else attaches to. That comes off the holder. And now we can get this backpack off. We twist it against the wire to break the super glue if we can, and that should come free. A little bit more awkward than I was hoping it would look, but it came free all the same. And then I'm using the cutters to break off the excess super glue that would make it stick out further than it should. And then I've dropped it. Great. And now you just stick the peg in the hole, and then all of that area that isn't quite painted is now covered up, so it doesn't really matter. We're going to do the same with the arm, which is actually proving tricky to remove. With hindsight, maybe glue wasn't the best idea, having looped the wire over. So I wrestle with this a little bit off camera and get it free, and then find that the hole is now full of glue. So I've got a large drill, and I'm drilling it not to make the hole deeper or anything, but just to try and crack the super glue and get it out of the hole. Which is a simple enough fix, it's just it may not occur to you the first time this happens that this needs to happen. Right, now that should fit quite easily in the one location that it fits, and again none of the blue pegs are showing through, and they would if you left huge gaps on the paint job. And there we go, that's 3 pieces put together. Now we're going to break the head free, which again, this super glue is apparently a lot stronger than I thought it was, because it's surprisingly hard to break this off. But we get there eventually. And that can now be glued in. Because I've separated it from its original stem, you can now actually glue it in any position you like, so it doesn't have to be looking in the standard direction, it can actually be looking up, which is I think how I'm going to glue it. Now, unlike before, I am going to use plastic glue in this case, because this is meant to be a more permanent join rather than something I want to snap off later on. So I'm going to apply glue first to one surface, and then the other, and then just hold them together for a few seconds until it starts to bond. Now, I'm saving the part on the plastic frame for last because it reveals a very obvious flaw and why I don't usually paint things on the plastic frames or sprue. And that is that you have to cut it away afterwards, leaving a patch which is the original plastic colour on the piece that you've painted, so it actually leaves this horrible bit of blue, which is smaller than I expected, but even so, it's a bright yellow Space Marine. You don't really want blue on the elbow pad, it doesn't make much sense. So at this point, in order to finish the model, you've actually got to go through and do some touch-ups. You've actually got to use primer. You've got to go all the way back to primer because it's bare plastic. And so what you'll find I do little by little is I go through grey primer. And then because I know the coverage of this isn't perfect, I'll go through grey primer again. And then ceramite white, 2 thin coats, and then the army painter demonic yellow, 2 thin coats again. So that sounds a little involved, but it is necessary to get it up to the same colour standard as the rest of the model. So here we are with the second coat of grey primer, and now we're going to start on painting it with ceramite white from the Games Workshop. You'll notice in between, by the way, that I've used texture paint on the base and painted the edge of the base brown, which I didn't think was particularly relevant for this video because you can assume that I will do the base on every miniature. It just happened to happen between primer coats in this case, or primer coats on this elbow pad anyway. Whilst it might start to seem a little bit pedantic, I am showing you every single coat because I do want to make you aware that to do this small touch-up, it took 6 coats of paint to get it to the same standard as the rest of the model, which may seem excessive at first, but actually it's what the rest of the model has had, and if you don't do it like that, it will really show. Even after it's painted yellow, you'll still be like, that doesn't look quite right. And finally, this is the second coat of demonic yellow from the army painter, which finishes off the elbow pad. As I say, this is why I don't like using the plastic frame, though it is a perfectly viable method. And that's it, that's what the Marine looks like afterwards, having split him into sub-assemblies to paint, and then worked on all of the parts separately before assembling them again at the end after everything was painted. I hope this helps.
Right, if you watched this far, first of all, thank you for watching. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you liked it, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell-shaped icon so you can get notifications about future videos. I hope they will be coming out soon.